What's up, Physique Training Nation? So today I'm going to go into one of the most requested topics from you guys, which is how to break through barriers and build some stubborn calves. Now, today I'm going to go into some tips, some strategies, some exercises to basically help you grow your calves if you struggle with growing your calves. So without further ado, let's just jump straight in and we'll share some tips along the way and some strategies that you can implement right away into your own training. Okay, so now you can use a dowel for this, and you've got a dowel at your gym. If you don't, then actually, like I'm using here, a pull-up bar is also great. Now, all I'm gonna do is just place my big toe, so the front of my foot, my big toe, on that bar. Now, you might have seen this a few times, people kind of drive their knee over their toe just to improve that dorsiflexion range of motion. Now, if you use a towel or something like a dowel, or like in this case, I'm using a lat pull down handle, it just allows an extra increased range of motion and kind of takes that big toe through that extra range of motion as well. So all I'm gonna do is just go into that stretch, just feel that deep stretch in the back of my calf, more that kind of soleus, that Achilles tendon area, and then just come out of it, okay? So I'm just rocking my knee over my toe. It's a dynamic stretch. Can hold there for a few seconds if I want to, and then release. Now all that's doing, as I said, is just increasing that dorsiflexion range of motion. We can kind of go more towards one side a little bit if you want to, kind of explore that range of motion. We can go more towards the other side as well, just explore those different ranges of motion, and then just directly centrally over that big toe, okay? So that's our first movement. We can throw that in at the beginning of our workouts just to increase that dorsiflexion range of motion, and then we can go straight into our loaded exercises from there, okay? So follow along and let's go into our first loaded exercise. So rather than think about this as a calves focused workout, think about this as individual tips that you can implement right away within your own calves training. Now, the first tip I want to give you is if you want to prioritize your calves, same with any other muscle, is to potentially think about actually starting off your workouts with your calves instead of finishing off your workouts. Now, we're all guilty. We're all guilty of throwing in or sprinkling in some calves work at the end of our lower body workouts. But actually, my first tip is if you want to grow your calves, maybe even consider starting out that lower body workout with some calves training and then going into, say, your quadriceps workout, your hamstrings workouts, and those kind of portions of your workout afterwards. So that's your number one tip. Second tip is actually just to use a combination of standing calves exercises and seated exercises where your knees are in a more flexed position. So this is one of the movements I do like to include within my own workouts. So we're going to go through this. It's going to be a Smith machine calf raise. Now, all I've done here, I've just placed a couple of plates on the floor. Now, you don't necessarily have to, but they do increase that range of motion exactly as we were speaking about just a minute ago, that allow you to go into those deeper ranges of dorsiflexion range of motion and get that real deep stretch in your calf. Now, doing this in a Smith machine is far more stable than doing this with a barbell on your back, so that's why we're going to be doing it. Instead of plates, you can also use like a block or something like that if it's more secure. So all I'm going to be doing is getting underneath, making sure my feet are kind of square forwards, and we're going to go into different foot placements a little bit later on, okay? But for now, feet square forwards. I'm simply going to stand up with that Smith machine, okay? And all I'm going to do is press through my big toe all the way to the top, squeeze my calves as much as I can, and then come all the way down to the bottom as full range of motion as I can. So all the way at the top, squeeze my calves, and then back down. Now, when I do more standing motions like this, I'm biasing more that gastrocnemius portion of my calves. We'll go into later while we might go into a seated variation, but standing variations tend to bias more of that gastrocnemius, that kind of chunky part, more towards the top of our calves, all right? So Smith machine calf raise is a go-to for me, it's a go-to for a lot of people. It's one of my favorites. It's very, very simple, but most people do get it wrong. Main point here, press through your big toe, contract your calves to initiate the movement, big squeeze at the top, and don't use momentum. Okay, so this is technically our third tip, but it's going to be our second exercise. Now, what you can also try if you do have stubborn calves, because of how powerful that Achilles tendon is, it tends to overtake in a lot of, especially more standing calf variations. So what you can do, you can also try dead stop repetitions. Now, a seated leg press machine like this is another great option. Very, very similar to the standing calf raise in the Smith machine. This seated variation is a knees extended variation, so it's more kind of biasing that gastrocnemius portion of your calves. So what we're going to do in that seated position here, we've got our knees soft, but they're relatively straight. Now, when we get down to that deep stretch at the bottom, which this machine allows really easily, we pause for just about 2 seconds, all right? It takes about 2 seconds-ish to stop that stretch reflex from really overtaking, and then all the way to the top. So down, 1, 2, and squeeze. Down, 1, 2, and squeeze, all right? So just by adding that pause, it stops Achilles tendon and that stretch reflex from really overtaking that exercise. So it's all kind of contractile tissue, contractile properties that are actually performing that exercise, okay? So that's tip number 3, minimize how much your Achilles tendon is kind of doing work and how much kind of body English is doing work. And you can put a lot more load and stress on those calves by simply just adding a dead stop for about 2 seconds to every single rep. So tip number 4. Now we're sticking with these standing variations which bias more that gastrocnemius. So kind of that chunky part at the top here, all right? Your gastrocnemius is kind of broken down into 2 heads. You've got a medial head and a lateral head. Your medial head is more in the middle, and then you've got your lateral head on the outside. So our next tip here with, again, another standing variation, is to vary the stance in which you're stood to bias different heads of your gastrocnemius, okay? So here's what I mean. So toes straight is your standard variation. We can add a dead stop to that if we want to, or we can kind of just come straight out of it at the bottom, all right? Now that is kind of relatively even as far as your gastrocnemius goes. We get some medial and lateral head activation there. Now, if we want to hit more that medial head on the inside, then we're actually going to turn our toes slightly outwards. So if we turn our toes slightly outwards, we're hitting more the inside head of our calves. And that's actually relatively comfortable to perform like that. Again, just getting that deep stretch as we're doing it all the way down. We can add a dead stop if we want to, but pressing through our big toe, big squeeze at the top. Okay. We can also go toes slightly inwards. Now, if we go toes inwards, now this isn't always comfortable for everyone, but if we go toes slightly inwards, this actually is biasing a little bit more of that lateral head. So we get about another 4-5% extra shift onto the outside leg. So it's not a complete game changer. It's not like isolating one area of your calves, but we can shift a little bit more emphasis on either the inside of our calves, going like that, or the outside of our calves, going like that, okay? You can vary kind of approaches, you can vary the angle at which you perform things. But generally speaking, if you turn your toes slightly outwards, they're gonna bias a little bit more of that medial head. If you turn them slightly inwards, so kind of toes pointing towards each other, you're gonna be biasing a little bit more of that lateral head. You can kind of combine both techniques and both stances within the same workout to kind of cover all bases, or you can just stick with toes straight forwards. So at the beginning of the video, I did actually mention there's a difference between seated and standing variations. It's a very, very common theme among calves workouts, and especially more in the kind of the old school bodybuilding community, for standing variations to be more in the lower rep ranges, so more in that pure hypertrophy rep range, say 8 to 12 reps, and then go to seated variations, which will be in a slightly higher rep range. And that mostly comes from a little bit of research into muscle fiber types and the difference between proportions of fast twitch and slow twitch fibers within the gastrocnemius and soleus. Now, what the research does also say is that really there's no added benefit to training a muscle according to its fiber type, or at least we don't know it makes a difference right now. So generally speaking, I would suggest that for whether it be seated variations, i.e. to target your soleus muscle, or standing variations more to target your gastrocnemius, your protocol is based around muscle hypertrophy, regardless of thinking about what the muscle fiber distribution is in those areas, okay? So what's gonna grow muscle in one area is also going to be able to grow muscle in another area, that same protocol, regardless of that muscle fiber type, or training according to muscle fiber type. Okay, so difference between exercises where you're going to target your gastrocnemius versus your soleus is when you're standing, it's more kind of gastrocnemius focus. When you're seated, it's more soleus focus. The reason for that, and you might be wondering why I'm holding a resistance band, but I'm just going to explain a little bit of kind of basic anatomy. The reason for that is because our gastrocnemius crosses across our knee, okay? So we can kind of imagine it a little bit like that, crossing over our knee. Obviously, that's exaggerated. It doesn't have that amount of leverage, but it's over our knee, all right? Now, if we're stood up, just imagine that muscle just lengthening. As soon as we go into that bent knee position, just notice that band slacken a lot more, okay? And that's basically what happens. Exactly the same as that band happens to our calf, that gastrocnemius portion of our calf. As soon as we bend our knee, it slackens off. And by it slackening off, it means we can't activate it as much. And that means we work our soleus, which is kind of underneath and below, a lot more. So seated calf raise is a prime example of a really excellent exercise to target that soleus portion of your calves. Now, very, very simple exercise, but most people do get it wrong. I've explained the correct technique for this quite a few times actually on social media and written articles about it, but it bears me talking about again. So what you're gonna do is just set up, we'll start kind of with our toes straight forwards on this one. And we want our big toe planted in that foot platform, all right? We don't want our big toe off the edge there. We want our big toe planted in that platform. So as soon as we unrack here, okay, your machine will vary, but this one kind of unracks just by pressing that in there. As soon as we unrack, we get into that nice deep stretch at the bottom. Feel that full stretch, go through full range of motion. And then we initiate that by contracting our calves, particularly our soleus, and pressing through our big toe, all right? Now, by pressing through our big toe, it basically means we're kind of taking that path of greater resistance, all right? So we're pushing through kind of that longer lever arm at the bottom of our foot, all right? Rather than kind of shortchanging ourselves by pressing kind of through the knuckles of our feet, all right? So big stretch at the bottom, press through your big toe, calves, big squeeze at the top. So all the way down to the bottom, big stretch, big squeeze at the top. As before, as I've said, we can do toes out a little bit more, we can do toes in, or we can stay relatively neutral like this. Another thing I see with this one in particular is chucking a load of weight on and kind of going a little bit back here with it, right? So your torso kind of comes back with it. Instead, we want load over. We don't care how much we're lifting. It's just a stimulus at the end of the day, okay? We're trying to stimulate growth. So lean over it, put as much load as you can over those calves. Some of the most experienced of those that train and have some of the best muscular development know how to make even the lightest of sets and the smallest amount of weight look as heavy as they possibly can. And that's because they've mastered the art of tension, feeling that targeted kind of sensation within their muscles. So same with this exercise as with any other. Think about what it is you want to get out of that exercise. You've got to think about it as it's just a stimulus at the end of the day. We're giving your body kind of that trigger, all right? We're telling it to do something with that exercise. We're telling it to get stronger next time. We're telling it to build larger muscles, basically. And we need to be sending it the right signals. Weight, to a degree, almost doesn't matter too much, providing we're kind of maximizing tension, maximizing sensation within that targeted muscle. If you don't have access to a seated calf raise machine, then in my opinion, this is your second best option. All you need is a bench, something to sit on, or a box, it doesn't really matter. I'm on the back of a hamstring curl machine at the moment, just because it's the only thing available for me to sit on, and just a couple of plates on the floor. Now, you don't need the plates on the floor, but as I explained earlier on in the video, it just allows that increased range of motion. Grab some dumbbells and place them on your knees, just keep them stable, and exactly like what we did in that seated calf raise machine, press through your big toe, drive your big toe down into the floor, initiate by contracting your calves all the way to the top, big squeeze, and then all the way down to the bottom. You will find with this one that you will probably need a good amount of weight resting on your thighs. So if dumbbells aren't providing enough load for you, then you can quite easily just grab a few plates and pop them on there, all right? Now just bear in mind you want the load over your toes as much as possible. not kind of back here, otherwise it's cheating. You're not using as much of that load as you possibly can, or not placing that load actually through the muscle as much as you can, as if it was forwards. So that's our kind of final exercise that I'm going to share with you, final tip that I'm going to share with you. There's a lot you can use and a lot you can kind of take away from today's tips, really. I would just pick maybe 1 or 2 exercises. I would go with a standing variation and a seated variation. Stick maybe within that 8 to 12, 8 to 15 rep range. Progressively load that exercise over 3 to 4 weeks or even longer. Once you reach a plateau, then throw in another exercise, switch the exercise up. So say a standing calf raise can be a calf raise in the leg press machine or something like that. Your seated calf raise in the seated calf raise machine can be swapped out for something like this, or vice versa. But you're just changing that up a little bit, or we can change the foot placement, we can change the technique, we can add some dead stops, some pauses, add some intensity techniques like rest pauses and supersets and things like that as well afterwards. But keep it simple, use the tips that I've shared with you today, and just be consistent with them for a few weeks. And I guarantee, absolutely guarantee, you will see some breakthrough growth in your calves if you stick with the plan that's down on paper. As always, you know, I'm all about sharing tips and sharing the exercises. If you want the implementation and the accountability, obviously someone like myself and my online coaching program will give you exactly what you need to ensure that you are getting those results that your efforts deserve. I will add a link below to that if you're ever interested in getting a free consultation with online coaching. Make sure you like this video and subscribe, and I will see you soon.